entendre François-Xavier Selleret.
To François-Xavier Selleret, the Director General of AGIRC-ARRCO. And François-Xavier Selleret is going to answer our questions on the role to be played by the pension funds in the promotion of the well-being among the elderly. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure for us to welcome François-Xavier Selleret. François-Xavier is a loyal partner of the chair and of our thinking process. He's also the general manager of AGIRC-ARRCO. And as such, we're going to ask him questions on the well-being of retirees. François-Xavier, maybe the first question we can ask is, how a federation like AGIRC-ARRCO take this question of the well-being of retirees seriously? Good morning, François-Xavier. Thank you for this nice question. I just wanted to offer a definition of well-being. Which definition can we give? If I take the historic definition, which was given by AGIRC-ARRCO, and this is, it was very well said by the former chair of AGIRC-ARRCO. The role was to guarantee the future retirees a kind of fair purchasing power equal to, or more or less equal to the one of the working population. AGIRC-ARRCO wanted to bring a purchasing power which is similar to the working population for the retirees. And this is one definition of the well-being. But not only that, we need solidarity between generations. One of the promise should be honored for each generation. We should reconcile generations around a dimension, a shared dimension and vision of well-being. It should be secured over time. And this is why when the social partners negotiate, because we are a joint organization, a joint body, I should have said it at the beginning, we always have in mind the fact of securing that over time and having a good equilibrium between generations. We have reserves as well, 60 billion, and we should conduct the scheme so as to secure the payment of pensions beyond the economic and demographic problems as we have experienced this year. Our imperative, our prerequisite is to guarantee the payment of pensions, not only to the retirees, but also to the future generations. And this is a condition for us to accept contributions, to pay contributions, because each generation knows that the next generation will be embarked upon this approach. So this definition guarantees a management and an adoption over time. When you are a customer at AGIRC-ARRCO, you are insured for 70 years, 25 years of retirement, among which, so therefore, this dimension of well-being and sustainability should be shared by the various generations so that this social pact may be secured over time. Thank you. At AGIRC-ARRCO and in the various pension funds of this group, of this federation, what is the illustration of this well-being for the seniors so that they can have a social activity, act as volunteers? We have a strong social action, and among the priorities of this strong social action, we have two pillars. First, the well-aging, what we call well-aging. It means, for instance, in terms of prevention, we have a prevention policy, which is specifically well-developed, and we are an original player in terms of prevention compared to other players. We want to combine the medical and psychological approach, and when we want to have the longest life expectancy without any disabilities, we need to mobilize not everything. We need to have proper health, of course, but to maintain people at home as long as possible, we've developed a number of services, like, for instance, an ergotherapeutic diagnosis. People should be able to go out more often and be supported and in the various daily events. We also suggested to young retirees to help job seekers so that the job seekers may benefit from the experience of the elderly. And then we have a very important mechanism so as to help the carers, the helpers. The characteristics is that we are living longer and longer, and as a pension fund scheme, we need to take care not only of the helped people, but the helpers as well, the carers. The carers may be a worker, and therefore we should offer them solutions to have a rest from here and there, or to because people would like to be staying at home as long as possible very often. Therefore, we have a prevention policy, a support policy, and a support policy for the carers as well, for the caregivers, so that people can age as well as possible. We know that it requires various capacities for that, various tools, and the social partners and we have wished to make progress and to have a prevention policy in terms of a loss of autonomy and to offer the people getting this insurance to have at their disposal a number of tools and services. A final word, which public policies seem to you a priority for the well-being and the elderly? Well, the public policies which have the priority is policies meeting the expectations of our citizens. Those policies should give concrete answers to our citizens. For instance, there is a territorial aspect. Solutions should not only exist, but should be close to the retired people. So territoriality is very important, and it should be sustainable as well. As I said, we should not oppose generations. On the contrary, we should try and reconcile them. And a public policy enabling to maintain as long as possible relations, social, family relations around home, because we, each and every one of us, would like to stay at home among your family, among your relatives and friends. And this is an expectation, and this expectation should be met individually and collectively. It's a way of making it sustainable and making it adopted by the citizens. It's a matter of legitimacy for public policies. Thank you. Perfect. Mathieu, back to you. Yes, thank you, François-Xavier Selleret. We have a panel discussion which is a bit different. We are going to have Nathalie CHUSSEAU. She's going to present a program. Nathalie, are you with us? Can you hear us? Yes. Here you are. So good morning again, Nathalie, or good afternoon. Nathalie CHUSSEAU, we know you. You are a professor at Lille, and you are an associate member of the chair, a very important member. And you also co-chair the network on longevity with us. And demographics is not only longevity, but we wanted, and that's what we are going to do more and more within the chair, is to work on the demographic transition and the arrival of those young people on the labor markets. And those young people are in a very disturbed world. And you wanted to understand the reasons for the low social mobility, especially in the north of France, les Hauts-de-France. That's your region. But you have objective reasons as well, apart from that, to have focused your presentation on the Hauts-de-France, on the north of France. Yes, indeed. Why was I interested in the Hauts-de-France? We cannot hear you, Nathalie. Well, my mic is on. Apparently, François-Xavier cannot hear. Okay, well, okay, go ahead, Nathalie. Is that okay? Can you hear me now? Yes, go ahead. Okay, good. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Yes, good. So let's start. Beyond the fact that it's the region, the north of France, where I teach, but there's another reason for my choice. This region has other characteristics. The social mobility in France is rather limited. It's one of the countries where the social scheme very strongly determines the school results of the pupils. And when you look at what is happening in the north of France, in terms of social position, the Hauts-de-France has an even more limited social level than in France, with a characteristic which is alarming. The social mobility, the descending social mobility is stronger than the ascending one. In other words, someone who was born in the Hauts-de-France will descend the social ladder more than his parents. Or what does it mean? A more limited social mobility. It means that the children of the popular classes will not really have an easy access to the other class. And that's what we see in the north of France. Social mobility is already restricted there. And this population of the Hauts-de-France is very vulnerable, and especially because of the crisis in the 70s, the industrial crisis. So this population has accumulated problems. The level of education is lower in this region. The labor market is bad, and there are a lot of unemployed people. So the individuals have accumulated all these difficulties and therefore are more vulnerable. Furthermore, it would mean that since the crisis of the 70s right up to now, where we see that the social mobility remains low, it means that the social inequalities are being transmitted to the current generations. We cannot hear François-Xavier. Oh, yeah, okay. So the objective of this work is to look at the transmission of these social inequalities. Yes, to understand why there is a school inequality in this region with a dual objective to reduce the social fatality and this self-censorship within schools on this population, and to try and favor the inclusion of those vulnerable populations. So what we want to see is to which extent the social origin and the confidence in the future may influence the school hopes of families. That is to say, the level of diploma, the parents and the children may think they can pretend, and the orientation choices made by them. That's what we are examining. This is what you call a family self-censorship? Yes, or school self-censorship. We realize that the children coming from the less privileged families will have a lower ambition and will not project themselves so much into the future, and they will have less hopes and therefore less hopes than a child coming from a privileged family. And for that, we examine the behaviors and the beliefs in this region. In this region of France, the hopes And aspirations of the families and the children are not as high. Yes, it's part of our work assumption. What we believe is that the local population has developed because of the traditional industry crisis, the experience in the 70s, although in the past it was a very flourishing region. This population has developed a low level of confidence and a kind of fatalism, and for several reasons. There was a deindustrialization with an obsolescence of the skills acquired. We had a very skilled population, highly skilled, and then we no longer needed them. And of course, with very important difficulties to reintegrate the labor market. They were not able to be trained differently. And this and because of the organization of the traditional industries was very specific, there was a social organization related to these labor organization. And therefore, we there is an economic context, a downgraded economic context with a social organization and a labor organization completely disturbed, and therefore the families would have less confidence in the future, and consequently their hopes will not be as high, and especially for the school success. So there is an underinvestment in education, and it's chronic. The rate of non-graduates is higher. What's the point of making efforts at school if your future hope is equal to zero? So the less you make projections in the future, the less efforts you'll make, and it will have a negative impact on your success at school and the level of diploma. And but the problem is that the school inequalities are being transmitted from a social point of view, and this may explain why we have a low social mobility. So the school inequalities in the north of France could be explained by a very strong self-censorship at school, and also because of the loss of traditional industries. That's very interesting, but what is the methodology of your work? Yes, the work has already started. So we have organized a survey and we're going to produce this survey in the north of France. And we are gathering data on the school aspirations of students and parents till the age of 15 years of age. And so we ask questions to one parent and one child. So what are their hopes, their degree of confidence, self-confidence, and the trust in the future and in the social position, and if they believe in this social elevator. And we believe that we'll see that the social environment is absolutely decisive, and this school self-censorship is more pronounced for pupils coming from underprivileged social and economic families. And we are launching 3 surveys in 3 academies in other regions, Grenoble as well, and Clermont-Ferrand. This way, it would be possible to benchmark and to compare the school hopes and the social mobility. And then we're going to process those data from an economic point of view, and we'll see whether those beliefs and hopes have an impact on the choice of jobs and studies. We anticipate that the people born in the Hauts-de-France will be pessimistic and will have less ambition career paths or hopes for a career path. And then we'll use this psychological and social methodologies. We're going to conduct experiments in labs to highlight the role played by the social environment, and to show the beliefs of the families of one generation may have an influence on the next generation. Once again, it's very, very interesting. Another 2 questions, and it'll be the last questions. What do you expect in terms of outcome, and which mechanism can you put into place to reduce those inequalities or social mobility? And the second question, which is more slyer, could we get the first outcome for July for our symposium? We'll already have the outcome. I think we'll get them in March or April. We already carried out some experiments at a lab level. So what's the point of these surveys? The objective is to be able to offer an educational policy, a specific policy, taking on board those beliefs in order to favor the school success of pupils, especially those coming from the poorest districts. We're going to define learning techniques targeted for those people to open up the scope of possibilities in order to reduce this gap. And in the long run, it means allow with specific education policies in order to raise the level of education of this population in the region and favor the social mobility. Thank you very much, Nathalie. It is really right at the center of our concerns, so much so that the next keynote is on a related theme of a friend from India. Okay, we know him quite well, and he's going to step in and talk about the consequences of the health crisis on the Indian students.
Myself, Dr. Pradeep Kumar Choudhury. I teach economics in Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. My major areas of research includes inequality in education, education and labor market, education and development from an, particularly looking at the issue of education and development from an interdisciplinary perspective. So that's the point I am trying to bring in. Me and my student did a study on risk and uncertainty of students in accessing higher education in the country. So that in this keynote, I am trying to give what you call brief idea on that report that we are preparing, and still it is going on, ongoing report. So what I am trying to say that a big concern among the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuring lockdown afterwards is education, which is well known in the literature and also in the global level. The entire education sector in global level has come to a standstill. E-learning platforms are something that many schools and universities around the globe are adopting. But what is happening to the students, even if they are in an online platform, is very important to understand for me, or for anyone for that matter. What I am trying to do in this particular study, which is based on a primary survey of around 1,128 students across the country, represented all over India, are like this. There are 3-4 important points I want to mention very briefly, because this is a longer report, but given the time, I want to be very brief on this. One is about the digital divide between poor and rich and rural and urban areas, or have and have-nots, which is again creating problem in taking online classes and all. That is first thing. Second important thing that we are finding is the issue of online teaching learning. It's not about whether the students having access to internet or not, rather it's beyond access. So I see that it's beyond access, because the students having access to internet and gadgets, e-gadgets, is also not helping them truly. So they get several other difficulties in the process. That's another important thing that we consider as a major risk or uncertainty among students. The other risk uncertainty that we see is the labor market uncertainty, because the students who are passing amid COVID-19 pandemic, particularly the final year graduates of any discipline for that matter, will get really difficulty in getting into the job market. So they are really in tension. I call it as a severe risk, in the risk zone in getting into the labor market. That is another important aspect that I am trying to see. The other important thing that I am trying to see in this report is students' educational aspirations. Students' education, how the COVID-19 pandemic is changing the students' educational aspirations, particularly in the context of developing countries such as India. So that is another important thing that I am going to examine in this work also. The last issue that we have addressed through this primary survey is about how the institutions, particularly let's say the higher education institutions or the universities, are helping the students when they are in the risk, when they are like not attending the campus, they are at home, what kind of institutional support they are getting to minimize their risk. That is another important thing that is not being examined. I don't find any study on education in the let me get into one by one. I'm not giving very what is already known that in the global context many schools are being closed. UNESCO has clearly said that almost all schools in the global level is being closed, so that is having impact on students' learning and several other important aspects. I am not examining those. In coming to the context of India and that to higher education sector, close to 40 million students, 37.4 million students in India now enrolled in enrolled in universities and colleges with 1,000, like we have 1,000 universities and 40,000 colleges, but none of them are attending universities or colleges. That is another important thing that we see. The other important aspect that why we should study this is largely the students in India are accessing private universities or colleges. Once they are accessing private universities and colleges, that's really a difficult situation. Really a difficult situation has come to us, where students are not capable to pay the fees charged by universities, even if they are not attending the universities and colleges. They are also at financial risk. That's another important thing that's happening in the. That is a kind of risk that's there with the students in higher education institutions in the country. Let me go, given all this, what we did a survey of 1122 students we covered. The survey title was Indian Higher Education During COVID-19, Understanding Students' Risk and Uncertainties was the idea that we took. The targeted group for this was any student accessing higher education anywhere in India. Using almost a kind of snowball, but later on it became a kind of random. We collected we reached the students. For example, we sent the links, the online, this is an online survey. So we send the links to, let's say the teachers, then some teachers and some students, then teachers send to the link to the students send to the link their friends. This is the way that we reached with several students, let's say. That's the reason we crossed 1,000 students, 1,122 respondents at the all India level. And when we got the data, we found that this is truly a representative sample, because we got the students from almost all states and also from different socio-economic backgrounds, and also their academic background. We got the students from undergraduate degrees, also PhD level, master, post-graduation level, and all levels of students we got. The other important characteristics of the sample is we also got students who from humanities and social science disciplines, as well as professional students who are getting into who are engaged in laboratory work. So because that is an important aspect that is also being discussed in the literature, that students who are accessing professional courses, it is becoming difficult. It is becoming difficult for them to get into the colleges. As a result, they are really getting in trouble. So that aspect also we study. I'm not getting into the detail of socio-economic profile of the students. Let me get into the issues that we addressed. An important issue that we addressed in this context is the online teaching. What we have seen that what we have seen here is not only who all are accessing e-gadgets or internet, rather what we saw that even if they have access, what kind of problem they are facing. That is an important concern for us, rather than who are getting access. I am not saying that who all are not getting access is not an issue. That is an important issue that we all should understand very clearly. But what is not being understood in the discourse after COVID-19 pandemic on technology and education is what kind of problem they are facing. We see that the technical adaptability or access to internet is a myth that is going on in higher education institutions. There are several higher education institutions in the country. Students are getting access to e-gadgets and internet, but actually they are not learning. The survey clearly spelled out that the students, respondents, they clearly said that even if they have access, they are getting really difficult situation in accessing higher education because the kind of access they are getting, that is not helping them. Even students are not ready to help them very clearly. That's another important thing that we are finding in this study. The other important thing that we see, the other important aspect that we studied is the kind of labor market, what you call the labor market uncertainties that students are getting in this. What we studied in this, because if you see the literature, what the literature that have come up in education and COVID-19 pandemic, one important aspect that is being said, not being studied well, but it is being said very clearly, is graduate unemployment. Because that was there in pre-COVID-19 pandemic, but it has extensively seen in post-COVID-19 pandemic. The students like the recent graduates have experienced a hard hit in many countries around the globe, and India is not an exception to this. The uncertainties in the labor market and the austerity measures by several state governments in India to not allow new entry into the government jobs have definitely increased the worries of the students. There are two things. One thing is there are not many jobs being created because of the economic slowdown. The other important thing that we see that the government, because of they are not getting enough revenue, they are taking several austerity measures. One of the important austerity measures they are trying to take is not opening up jobs, even in the government sector. Similar is the case in private sector. So there are not enough jobs for the graduates. So what we see that a gap clearly exists in understanding how recent university graduates who are new to the labor market are coping with the COVID-19 crisis, given considerable disruptions that has happened in the not only happened, that is still happening in the conventional job market activities. In this context, a part of the study aims to discuss the aspirations and anxieties and also the stress that university graduates in India are facing in terms of this great uncertainty and recession in the labor market, using the information that we collected through the field survey. Findings that we found in this particular context indicate that around 91%, almost all the respondents think that current year graduates are more affected than the last year graduates or the graduates who passed before pandemic in terms of securing jobs. And also, even if what we found, and another important point I want to highlight, that even if some graduates, they have got placement in the labor market, but that is being delayed. They are not getting into the labor market, even if they were assured placement before the pandemic. A reflection of this can be perceived through the circumstances of campus placement that I just said. Only around 13% of the students successfully secured jobs through campus placement drives out of the total sample of 1122. Of which joining of 40% students were affected or delayed or cancelled, they said. And 43% suspect that they would like to get affected in the coming near future. Because this survey we did in July and August 2020. So they are saying that definitely the joining of the graduates in the labor market is going to be disturbed given the COVID-19 pandemic. These uncertainties in the labor market are mainly attributable to the declining job opportunities, technological changes that is happening, and the subsequent changing nature of job due to the COVID-19 crisis. We did a logit estimate, rigorous empirical analysis that clearly reveals that the predicted probability of joining the labor market by graduates vary widely based on their socio-economic and institutional setting, and this is more so given the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, one example I want to highlight that graduates from lower class and castes have significantly less chance to join the labor market than their counterparts, and this is more so given the pandemic. what we find, there is a clear suggestion for this, that the graduates seeking employment opportunities are not only disposed to early challenges, but worried about their long-term career trajectories and earnings in the labor market. This is another important aspect. So first important aspect that I highlighted is on teaching learning processes and how technology, whether the technology is helping them or not. Second one is the labor market uncertainties the graduates are facing amid COVID-19 pandemic. The third important point that I am trying to highlight in this is like this. We are trying to see how the students are getting, whether the students are getting enough support from the institution, because support from institution plays a critical role in to avoid the risk and uncertainties that they are facing amid COVID-19 pandemic. What we saw from the report, or what we found from the report, is very clear. Several of the students who are doing their research, particularly at MPhil and PhD level, they are not getting their scholarship regularly. Though they were getting little bit at the time, like to somehow regular, they were getting before COVID-19 pandemic, but after the pandemic, they are really in serious position, given the kind of problem they are finding from the university. So one important thing that we found, there are new entrants to higher education institution. For example, the graduates who are aspiring for post-graduation after completion of their course, who are in final year of the study, they are not getting any clear position from the university, whether they should go for, how they should apply for entrance test, what date they are they are going to be examined, what kind of process they are going to follow, the university going to follow in this. These things are not clear. And here we see the role of University Grants Commission, UGC in Indian context, who regulates the universities in the country or other higher education institutions in the country. They are also not very clear on several aspects. That is actually confusing. Several students on this. So also to some extent we asked the students whether you have taken any student loan, and if you have taken, how you are going to repay that and all that. We found that several students, almost 60% of the students who have taken loan are worried about the repayment, because they are saying we are supposed to repay after getting a job in the labor market, which we are not getting. So this is being a great problem for the household as well as the student. And how the government is looking at the issue is not clear. Even how the commercial banks are looking at the issue is not clear. So what I'm trying to say in this context is, I'm trying to summarize the idea, because this is a longer report, but I'm trying to summarize the idea that students who are accessing higher education in India, which is a developing country, they are at high risk and uncertainty. And most of the risk are very it's not very short term. They are going to be long term that is going to affect the students in the long term. For example, the labor market uncertainties, labor market risks, their career risks, because I see that their career is at stake. There are several students who are still not clear whether they will enroll in the higher education institutions or not. My last point would be there will be a severe dropout from higher education institutions. That one study by National Institute for Educational Planning and Administration, NIPA, New Delhi, which is a university do research on education and development, that clearly says that several of the students who are currently accessing higher education, particularly the students from marginalized sections of the society and first generation learners, they are going to be severely affected in this pandemic, and they are going to be dropped out from the system. That is a serious, that issue is very serious, and the government should really look at it very critically and seriously. Else, the students, the kind of effort that is being given in the past 2-3 decades to include them in the higher education system is not going to help them, because they all will be dropping out slowly. That's my point. So what I'm trying to say that there is a greater risk of the students and uncertainty among students in higher education in the Indian context, and that issue needs to be looked at very seriously. I have examined 3-4 important issues. There will be several other interesting issues which might be which might differ given the socio-economic background of the student, but in general also this is a serious issue that needs to be looked at effectively by the government of India. Thank you for giving me a chance to be part of this symposium. I wish you all the best for this. Thank you.
Merci.
Right.
Merci Pradeep de nous avoir.
Thank you, Pradeep. for this awareness-raising presentation about serious problems for Indian students. It is very serious indeed for the future development of the Indian economy. Let's listen to Héctor VILLARREAL, who will give us a keynote speech. He's in charge of ITED in Mexico, and he's an important partner for our longevity network. Many things have been undertaken with Victor and ITEC. In particular, we worked on an index, ASPI index, Active Social Policy Index, that has been, as I said, developed in cooperation with ITED and is used in many countries in Central America. Thank you for being with us virtually, Victor. Oh, Héctor, sorry.
Dear friends, it's very nice to be able to participate in this seminar. I'm extremely honored. I would like to discuss some minutes about aging and well-being from a public finance perspective. I would like to recall some experiences in the Latin American region. Somehow, the experience with the pandemic has put a lot of pressure for public finance. What shall we do? How can we finance welfare? How can we take care about well-being? What shall be the priorities? The truth is that since the 2008-2009 financial crisis, there was this idea that respecting the way markets work, we needed strong governments, strong states that could tackle the problem with inequality and the well-being of the lesser people that are having like a lesser well-being in our societies. Well, if by itself this is a tough problem, once you consider the aging profiles of our population, this becomes much more complex. Now, with the COVID-19 crisis and the way many governments have indebted themselves, it's even more difficult. Is there a roadmap? The answer, as you may predict, unfortunately, there's no a roadmap. It's not that easy. However, there are some criteria that shall shed some light on the ways our government shall, could, and would proceed. First of all, we need to take care of the pension systems, something that we are finding in Latin America, and it's happening almost every place in the world, is that the pension systems are pressuring in a very difficult way the rest of the fiscal system. In the case of Latin America, basically the fiscal space is eroding so fast that it has been very difficult to do other social policies. So what should we do? And this has been a debate that it's not simple at all. Indeed, even the International Monetary Fund has been very prudent when addressing contingent liabilities. They said, okay, but it's not easy to recognize, it's contingent. We have to forget about this idea that contingent liabilities are not true financial liabilities. The first thing to address this situation is to measure how will be the payment streams for the next years, for the next cohorts. Maybe it's little you can do about that, but recognizing the stream of payments shall take us to a much better planning. That's the first thing. Second thing, it's about health. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us in different degrees that many of our health systems are very weak or are not as strong and resilient as we sometimes thought about them. Okay, well, do designs for our health systems? Absolutely yes. However, that's not only that. We need to see how we are going to finance these public health and private health systems. And we need to think outside the box. As my good friend François-Xavier says, these are times that are difficult, that are something different, and we need to have the idea of different solutions to these problems. We need to see how health is put in the table as a central right, but recognize that even if you have very good designs, if you do not have enough funds to sustain your services, then there's little you can do about that. So we need to make fiscal space to fund these public systems. We need to open the doors for the private sector to work in coordination with the public sector in a logic that takes into account markets, but that you cannot limit yourself to market incentives, to market structures. We need to do something about this. Otherwise, the health problems will be tragic for the poorest in our populations. Now, there's something we need to recognize. As our populations get older, the kind of diseases change. A demographic transition has an epidemiological transition. This always happens. The problem is that many of the diseases that are correlated with older age are much more expensive. We need to take an account of that too. Thirdly, we need to recognize, even develop theoretical tools and stances and good policy solutions to the economics of caring. We are being very, very behind the reality. So we need to address who shall bear the load of the economics of caring, both for older people, for younger people, even for people with some disabilities. We need to know how can we compensate economically people that are devoting a lot of their time to the economics of caring. We need, and this is a big problem in Latin America, we need to take care of the gender bias. Women have bear so far a big part of the load of the economics of caring. And these hampers our labor markets, and these hampers family structures, and this is taking a share in fertility rates, so we must take care of it. So if we are able somehow this triplet of pensions, health, and economics of caring, put them in the table and see how we will pay for that, this will help a lot. Nonetheless, there are other issues that we must discuss. When we think about aging and well-being, social policy jumps immediately. Nonetheless, if we are not able to invest in infrastructure, in public goods, then our economic growth will be compromised in the medium and in the long run, even in the short run. So how to reconcile the idea of having a very robust social policy, but not forgetting about investment in public goods and in all this infrastructure that is important to grow. I believe that we need to understand that there's a new reality that it's very pressing in terms of public finance, but that we need to go further than the short-run views and start doing generational accountings, start doing national transfer accounts, and understand that public finance and demographic public finance need to be set in medium and long time frameworks to include well-being measures, to understand inequality, considering not only static moments, we need to do it in an intergenerational, intertemporal framework. And we need to develop institutions. This is something especially important for less developed countries. We need to have the institutions that can guide our decisions and can go in a logic that it's not only political in nature. Of course, we are going to have political arguments always, but we need the technical support and we need to transmit this information and be able to explain it to society so we may have better decisions. The moment it's very challenging, however, it's also a lot of opportunities. I'm very grateful that you are with us in this seminar, that in this international symposium, and thank you for this time.